Welcome to You Are From God, where we open God's Word to discover His image in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today. Hello and welcome back. We're certainly grateful that you have decided to tune in and listen to another episode. Scott, you and I are in the middle of going through the book of Philippians, looking at the recipe for joy, putting Jesus first, others before self, and bringing yourself into the conversation and focusing on our needs and goals, but in a proper perspective of making sure Jesus is our King and we're looking to others before ourselves. So today we're picking up in chapter 2, beginning in verse 14, and we'll read through the end of the chapter. And as we have done these past few episodes, we'll break this down and look at each of these letters in the JOY acronym to really see where Paul is teaching these principles for the Philippians and also how he's modeling them himself, or those around him might be modeling this principle of joy. So picking up in Philippians 2 and verse 14 beginning, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be cheered by news of you. For I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. For they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. I hope therefore to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me, and I trust in the Lord that shortly I myself will come also. I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all, and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, near to death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. So receive him in the Lord with all joy, and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me." So, Scott, there's a lot here at the end of chapter 2. Why don't we break this down and start with how we see Paul teaching and practicing the idea of putting Jesus first in all things to really have true biblical joy.
Yeah, I think the powerful thing here, and again, we split this up into different podcasts, but the idea that chapter 2 begins with talking about us being like Jesus. And so you have this beautiful account of why we need to be humble, why we need to treat other people well, and then ultimately the humility that we see of Jesus. And then obviously we're trying to emulate that. And so verse 14 and 15 to me, Tyler, I think just does a beautiful picture of us understanding the whole joy piece. So you have Jesus, the fact that we talk about being a child of God, as it says in verse 15, just that phrase, children of God, it's in the middle of a sentence, but just that little phrase is just awesome for us to be able to even have that relationship that we're talking about. And the fact that it's other people that get to see our lights. We're letting our light shine for other people to have a relationship with God as well, to glorify God in all that we do. And therefore, the you piece of this, the blameless side of things. But this is all because of the foundation of us being children of God, because of his grace, his mercy, his love, that he has shown us, that he's given us this opportunity. But I just can't get past just that one phrase, you're a child of God. That really helps me out when it comes to the grumbling and disputing piece, when we really start with the J, as we should in all that we do, and understanding that relationship we have with him.
Right, because when we do grumble and dispute, it's putting that Y before the O. Right. We can say that we're truly putting Jesus first, but when we put ourselves before others in this way, when it leads to grumbling and disputing, we're no longer blameless and innocent. That idea of following, is the J really in that first place? Right. Is Jesus really first in my life if I'm not treating other people and interacting with other people the way that he would call me to? I love how Paul works in here as he kind of gives this awesome display of what this looks like. He says you're going to be like lights in the world. The word there is the idea of stars, just that we would shine in the midst of a dark, a crooked generation, he says here. And we shine because at verse 16, we're holding fast to the word of life. We're dedicated to living for Jesus, following in his footsteps. And you see this modeled as he goes on and gives some details about their, in particular, circumstances and the people that have been involved in the coming and going between this group of Christians and Paul himself. Namely, he brings up Timothy and Epaphroditus, and there's some awesome examples from the two of these men. I really like how he describes Timothy here in the idea that 21 and 22, we all have interests that we seek, and it's not wrong to seek your own interests, but when that's all you do, that's a problem. But the idea implied in verse 21 is that we need to be seeking the interests of Jesus Christ. Right. That's what it means to find true joy, is what is God interested in? What are his desires and will? And how can I be a part of accomplishing those things and making those things my own, my interests, my will? And then you get to where Timothy is in verse 22. He has proven worth, and he genuinely has concern for their welfare. That's up in verse 20. This real, actual caring for the others in this acronym. It's not forced. It's not a performance. There is true, genuine care for other souls, and the work that he's doing with Paul in the gospel is all because, one, he's dedicated to Jesus, but he also wants to see those in Philippi and Christians all throughout the world come to a deeper understanding of God, a greater devotion, a stronger faith, and a steadfast hope that leads to an eternity with him. Now, this is really fantastic when you look at the idea of what Epaphroditus does, because Timothy's going to be sent to them soon, but Paul kind of alludes to his own needs in this, Scott. He says, I'm going to send him to you soon, but I need to see how it's going to go well with me first. Verse 23 is an interesting verse to highlight the idea of the why in this equation. It's not just Paul saying, I'm not going to think about my own needs at all. He says, I've got some things that I need Timothy here. I'm focused on how I can send him to you when the time is right, but right now I really need him. And that's not wrong. Paul demonstrates we have to take care of ourselves, and there's other people that are part of that equation of self-care and addressing the issues of ourselves.
And I think that's such an important lesson for us. If we're going to do the JOY acronym, we've got to understand that we need other people. Mm-hmm. As much as we're talking about how we let our light shine and we encourage other people and we let people see Christ through us, there is a huge importance for us not to be so proud that we're not willing to let other people help us. And that's one of the beautiful things you'll see throughout the book of Philippians. But the reality is here, Paul needed people at this point. Obviously, he's not able to do a lot of these things himself due to his current situation. But you have somebody like Timothy, you have Epaphroditus. The other piece, Tyler, I think it's important for us to really hone in on this is that the fact that when he talks about the crooked and perverse generation that was going on in the first century, it's the same today. It's always been this way. And so there's the darkness that's around us, and a lot of times I'm afraid we can get caught up in the darkness, focusing on the darkness, rather than seeing the fact that not only is God here, and the light, the source of light is here, but he calls us to be, as you said earlier, the stars. We're called to let our light shine in the darkness. Too often we get caught up focusing on the darkness instead of realizing who the J is in this conversation. And so you have Paul in a very difficult circumstance. No, there's no question about that. But you have him understanding not only is God with him, but you have these people that are around him, in this case Timothy and Epaphroditus, that are going through some of their own struggles and difficulties, as we'll see with Epaphroditus. But they were still willing to help Paul as much as they could, and Paul was willing to accept the help from them. And that's such an important lesson, at least for me, that sometimes instead of seeking that help or allowing others to help, you try to take advantage, or just try to do it myself. And that's such a dangerous thing that we can get caught up in, because quite frankly, the work will suffer. And that's what we're striving not to have happen. And certainly it's the same thing here. So you have this man, Epaphroditus, who comes in, and just to your point, as you were talking in 25, where he calls him my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, also your messenger and minister to my need, because of the longing for you all, and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. So again, Epaphroditus was dealing with things. One of the things I noticed with this is that we know who Paul is, we know who Timothy is. We don't really focus on Epaphroditus so much, but Paul did. And it was his brother, his fellow worker, his fellow soldier. There were a lot of Christians in the first century that we may not know their names, or we may not know much about, but they all were standing for truth. And that's such a beautiful picture for all of us today as well. And so it's a beautiful lesson for us in this situation that Paul's in prison, Epaphroditus is sick, and then to see how he reacts to it, I think is highly important.
Yeah, I think I often think of Matthias in Acts chapter 1. He's the one who ends up replacing Judas for the 12 apostles. We don't think about him a lot. He had done all of the work to be an apostle leading up to that, and every time it mentions the apostles in the book of Acts after that, you know that Matthias is part of it. But you don't get his name mentioned specifically, but it's not about the recognition. It's not about Paul being awesome or Timothy being super great, even though he commends him here for his character. It's not about Epaphroditus, even though he gets the commentary here. He's just doing the work to the point where he's willing to give his own life, which is just awesome. So it's not about having the spotlight on me. It's about truly understanding the work that I'm doing, whether people know about it or not. God knows about it, and that I'm dedicated to putting him first in my life and the work that I'm doing and how I'm serving him with all my life, and understanding that I can bless other people and help other people like Epaphroditus was helping Paul. But to your point about the darkness always being around us, that can be like a very vague general, like this is how society is or this is how the world is right now. But Paul had some very close darkness to him. When Epaphroditus was so sick, he almost died. The verses that stick out to me in this reading recently, Scott, are when he's talking about Epaphroditus in 27 and 28. Indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Some translations will say grief upon grief. So what does that mean? It means there's two levels of sorrow. Epaphroditus, had he died, would have been that top layer, the sorrow upon sorrow. But that implies that there's this baseline sorrow that Paul's dealing with. In a letter where he's writing that I'm rejoicing in the Lord. Yes, I'm in prison. Yes, there are difficult things. There's a sorrow that's going on. Joy does not mean we are ignorant or deny the facts of our situation or that things aren't going on. He says in 28 that he's anxious, and he's trying to be less anxious by sending Epaphroditus back to Philippi. So to deny that we're feeling certain ways or that things are not the way we would like them is not what God has in mind for us. Paul here does a beautiful demonstration of being joyful, not being in denial about how I feel or about what's going on with me, but in the midst of that, acknowledging that those things are in the room, but God's in the room of my life. He's the one I'm going to choose to focus on. I can rejoice in the Lord because even with those other things coming and going throughout my life, he's remaining constant. He's always faithful. He's the one who is going to be that place I can hold on to, holding fast, and that I can always know I am focused on him. I have a reliability on the goodness of God, that he takes care of me, his grace and mercy are toward me, and understanding that in this relationship, when I am drawing near to him, he draws near to me. And so you see this in very practical, real-life terms, I think, here, where Paul's certainly been talking in the theoretical, but now he's showing, look, this is going on in my real life, in your real life, with people you know. And I think that's something we would do well to sit and meditate on, whether it's our own lives or the people around us. First of all, being honest with ourselves and what we're going through, understanding that we can thank God for those situations that he does deliver us from and take care of, and that the answer to prayers. But if we're going through difficulty, to understand that we can focus on him. We can still shine bright in those situations because God is still God. He is still all loving. He's still all good. He still has a plan and a purpose for my good into eternity. And I think for me, even though we don't think about Epaphroditus a lot, he is like a big highlight here in this second half of the chapter.
It's just so beautiful to think about this from the joy aspect of this. Because even earlier on, when he's in 16 and 17, when he's talking about the word of life and understanding hoping that he did not run in vain because he understood the faith that they had. Even then in verse 17 when he says, but even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I rejoice and share my joy with you all. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way and share your joy with me. You think, again, this relationship piece that we see throughout these verses that is grounded upon our relationship with God. It's the number one thing, the joy that we've been talking about. Jesus, my relationship with Jesus is going to be seen in my treatment of others, but it's also going to be seen in the fact that I find joy in what others do and their relationship with God. It brings me joy. One thing, Tyler, we talk about a lot, or at least I bring up a lot on here, is the idea that it's easy to become jealous of others when they're doing even things for God. Mm. And what a dangerous thing. Paul dealt with that. But what a dangerous thing it is for us not to react, as we see with Paul here, that he found joy in the fact that, that they were growing in their faith. They were continuing to live for Christ, even when he's in prison. And so the idea for us to put others first and to find joy in that is so important. And then to understand, as we talk about for ourselves, that this is all about being children of God. And that's the beautiful piece for every single one of us, to just wake up every day and remind ourselves of that we are children of God, that we all have the opportunity to let other people see that relationship that we can have with God, so that we all can be from God. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this program. Be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice so you never miss an episode.
Would you do us a favor and recommend this program to someone you know? We pray this simple act of sharing can encourage both of you in the faith and open up doors for meaningful and Christ-centered conversation. You can find us at youarefromgod.com. Click the connect button at the top of the page if you'd like to send us a question, give us feedback, or offer a suggestion for an episode. Catch up on previous episodes, find the year-long devotional, and more by visiting youarefromgod.com.